Kremlin has zero respect for us collectively, and in particular for the Trump administration.
It's my absolute pleasure to be joined once again by Ben Hodges, who is a retired United States Army officer. He became commander of United States Army Europe in November 2014 and held that position for 3 years until retiring from the Army in January 2018. Until recently, he was the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Centre for European Policy Analysis, specialising in NATO, transatlantic relationships, and international security. And of course, now he has his work cut out because we not only have the largest full-scale war happening on the territory of Europe since World War II, we also have the US descending into something that resembles a form of tyranny with features that are certainly familiar to me, having studied Putin's rise to power. And today we're going to talk about a variety of things. One of them, I think, is absolutely significant, and that is the fact that Russia attacked EU and UK assets in Ukraine yesterday, and that is just a week after it was striking US investments. Will there be any cost to pay whatsoever for Putin's aggression against the world? Ben, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
We're now going to move on to part two. Let's start with that topic. It seems absolutely extraordinary that despite all of the diplomatic noise and etc., the fact that Putin is striking EU sovereign territory, diplomatic territory, that in effect is an attack on the EU itself, striking the British Council, which is a very significant organisation closely affiliated with the British government, and of course taking out the US's largest investment in Ukraine last week. These are extraordinary, not just aggression, but it's mockery, isn't it? He's mocking the weakness of the West.
Yeah, I think it's been clear for some time that the Kremlin has zero respect for us collectively, and in particular for the Trump administration. This meeting in Alaska, then the meeting of all the European leaders with Trump and Zelensky and the White House, and then immediately after that, an increase in the number of drone strikes against Ukrainian citizens, and then of course the two attacks that you just referenced. So, and I think they feel pretty confident that this is going to continue, that the United States will not do anything. There was a press conference yesterday with the president's spokeswoman, Ms. Levitt, basically equating, well, the Ukrainians are also attacking inside Russia, and it's that's where they are. And you hear Vice President Vance, the nonsense that he spews out. So I think the Russians feel pretty confident that this administration is not going to do anything of substance.
It seems to be also hardwired into Putin's brain. I mean, occasionally he says things, and I know it's not a great idea to follow everything he says because, mostly it's nonsense and none of it leads to any real strategic action. He has said some things which are slightly softer about Zelensky, etc., etc. But it seems to be hardwired into his brain the idea that Ukraine began the conflict, began the war, which of course is absolutely the opposite of the reality. How has that come about, and how is it possible to rewire his brain to understand right from wrong, facts from lunacy?
You're talking about President Trump. Okay, because you had said Putin's brain.
Oh, sorry, Putin's brain. Yes, no, I meant Trump's brain. I guess subconsciously I was thinking that Putin somehow has managed to wire that mythology into him.
Well, it's understandable. Um, I think, I've thought for a while now about President Trump. Why is he so seemingly either pro-Putin, or he wants to be like him, or he wants to be admired by Putin? He's envious of the authority that Putin and Xi and Kim Jong-un seem to wield, by the way. All the trappings of that. I mean, and when you look at what he's done to the Oval Office, and I even now see American soldiers in the White House and Marines doing things that you I used to only see happening, like when Putin would walk it down through the doors and you'd have the two Russian guards there with their noses way up in the air. I now see American troops having to do this. And so he clearly is wanting to copy or imitate that. And then, of course, the other day he said, I'm the president of the United States. I can do whatever I want. That's absolutely not true, but he absolutely believes it. And all the people standing around him just nodding and offering their praise. So I think he sees himself as one of the three guys who's going to run the world. And so he doesn't want to offend Putin, perhaps. I I don't I don't know whether or not the Russians have something on him or whatever. I don't know that he was recruited as an asset, but clearly he gives the effect of being an asset with what he does and what he doesn't do.
Indeed, and Levitt seems to perhaps reflect back things that are said in private. I think it's actually sometimes more interesting to follow her than it is to follow him. And one of the things she said the other day was that Trump cannot govern when there is checks and balances, when there is
Yeah,
division of power, as if
what
that
an
was somehow
inconvenience.
inimical to the American system.
What an inconvenience, when the courts don't just roll over for you or the Congress or the media. Unfortunately, though, that's exactly what they are achieving. I mean, even David Ignatius, fairly well-known Washington Post journalist yesterday, came out with an opinion piece and said, well, Russia's entitled to their security concerns also. And I could not believe it. So now you even got guys like that who obviously feel the need. I doubt he really believes that, but they feel the need to find some sort of common ground with the administration in order to retain access. And so when you've got, you know, people like that rolling over, um, it is very, very concerning. When I see this, I'm sure you've seen it, and your great listeners have seen it. This gigantic poster of Trump's picture hanging off the side of the Labor Department building next to a gigantic American flag, and it's like, well, this is what you see in North Korea or China or obviously Russia, giant posters of the pictures of the dear leader, and then American troops, National Guardsmen walking through the city, armored vehicles. Um, it is an unbelievable visual that's there now.
And there are fundamental things. Those visuals which are of course stark, but then there are attacks on the separation of powers. One of which happened this week is the attempts to sack the Federal Reserve head, Lisa Cook. Another was the attempt to stifle job statistics, to start interfering with the sort of, the fine detail of good governance. No, that's maybe sort of slightly out of your wheelhouse there, but this seems to be, that same kind of meddling there could equally be applied to the military and national security structures.
Well, what it does, it gets normalized because there's not an uproar from the Congress or huge pushback, demonstrations in the streets because most people don't know exactly what the Federal Reserve is unless you're in the financial industry, in the business. And Ms. Cook, she's one of the part of the board of governors there. And what makes the Federal Reserve so effective and what it does is the fact that it is independent of, it's not a part of the executive branch, which some people seem to think. It is by design independent. And so that's why Trump is putting enormous pressure on Mr. Powell, who is the chairman, and then looking if he can also get rid of or replace some of the board of governors, like Ms. Cook, with people who are more likely to support what Trump wants. And so they're creating mythical things that she's done wrong because the only way she can be sacked is if she's found guilty of some crime. She can't just be fired. So this is important because it affects how people in America, but also around the world, think about investing in the United States. And when you don't have confidence in the financial institutions, you're going to be less likely to invest. And so this does undermine what we should be doing here in the U.S. Same thing with what's happening in the Center for Disease Control. We have an absolute lunatic who is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. It's unbelievable. And you've got thousands of doctors saying, wait a minute, this guy is making decisions not based on the science, not based on years and years and years of experience. And that's what's happening. So we have a real problem. And the biggest danger, Jonathan, is that they are doing things that will undermine the midterm elections next November, November of 26, because they can see already. I mean, his popularity ratings, all the ratings and confidence in him are down well below 50%. And so they know they're going to get killed in the midterm elections if they're allowed to proceed in a normal way. And so I think that's why all this energy about gerrymandering to create more Republican seats, uh, other things, this is going to be a very, very challenging, hotly contested time.
Before we move to the next question, I'd like to make a personal recommendation that I know you'll appreciate. You may have seen my interview last week with the director of the film series Kyiv of Mine, Ronnie Apteker. Well, I've partnered with them to help raise awareness of what I believe is an important film made for a Western audience to help break through the absurd stereotypes about Ukraine that are out there, some of which, of course, are amplified by propaganda. Kyiv of Mine is a documentary series about Ukraine's extraordinary capital, which I had the privilege to visit for the first time in January this year. The film production began in 2018, and much has changed since then. It's now 2025, and the story is far from over. Kyiv of Mine is a fast-paced, beautifully filmed, humorous, fun, insightful, heartbreaking, moving, and hopeful work. The very antithesis, in fact, of a doom-laden and worthy wartime documentary. This is a work that is extraordinarily uplifting. My friend, Operator Starsky, says that the film is made with so much love. The film series will make you laugh and cry. It's the only film about Ukraine that began before the war, yet has traced lives through the tumultuous times, and which follows the lives of more than a dozen Ukrainians in real time. This is an historic period told through highly personal and emotive stories. From Kiev's days of emerging prosperity after the Maidan Revolution through COVID and the full-scale invasion. The film is a breath of fresh air. Ukraine deserves a better conversation in the world, one that isn't centered around war, says Julian Ellis, filmmaker on Kyiv of Mine. It's hard not to agree with that, and the filmmakers have delivered on that promise. This is essential watching for anyone who calls themselves pro-Ukrainian. But I think it's also vital to get friends, colleagues, and family to watch it too, because the reality is few people have a vivid impression of Ukraine or any direct connection with its people. War is inhumane and abstract. Building alternative perception is essential for engaging the world with the importance of Ukraine's struggle. Find the links in the description of this video. And of course, the idea of having federal troops in various cities, I mean, that also, of course, could be a precursor to some form of suppression or manufacturing a crisis to say, well, you cannot hold a vote in these circumstances. Now, I don't ever tend to put questions to you based on sort of rumor and hearsay, but I think this one is important enough to perhaps sort of throw into the mix here. I was actually the first time, I'd never been there before. I was in DC a couple of weeks ago for a particular event, and one of the interesting things that I was discussing with somebody was that there is pushback within the military, there is pushback within the Pentagon and various institutions, and actually the horrors we're discussing of the Trump regime, without that pushback, could have already gone an awful lot further. One of those proposals was to set up not the sort of prisons in El Salvador, which they've picked on, but their initial idea, it is rumored, was that they wanted to set up concentration camps in military bases across the US. And it was through internal resistance that that didn't happen. Now, obviously, I'm putting forward something here which is sensitive, which is a rumor as such. But do you think it's sort of feasible that there is some resistance within the system? Do you know anything about that particular story?
I don't know anything about that particular story, except that I had also heard that that was one of the considerations early on because you've got facilities there. Um, I am glad to hear, I'm heartened to hear that there was pushback inside the Department of Defense against something like that. Hopefully, hopefully, you've got a lot of retired senior officers that are letting it be known through whatever means that this is unacceptable. These kinds of things that they're doing, the misuse of the military, the expectation that the military will perform tasks that are unconstitutional or certainly borderline illegal. I wouldn't expect to see uniformed officers publicly going out and saying this is wrong or whatever. Their job is unless it's illegal, they have to do that. But trying to prevent the administration from doing things that would be unconstitutional or illegal uh, is their responsibility. But I've been disappointed that more retired four stars have not come out, writing opinion pieces, talking publicly. There's really only a small handful of at the four-star level that have come out and said things, and I've been disappointed in that because these are women and men who are been deployed to combat three, four, five times, but they see the threats against General Milley. They see what has happened to people that have spoken out, or perhaps they have their own business interests, and the corporations for which they now work are saying, "Hey, if you like being on our board, or if you like whatever." I don't know that, but I've spoken to quite a few of them, and it's been very disappointing. But the Congress has got to do much more. You have House and Senate Armed Services Committees, you have all the other committees, and I can't believe that every single Republican really believes and is okay with what's happening.
The acquiescence of business and in some quarters the media, which seems to be extraordinary. We had the sort of the slow burn firing of Colbert, of course, but we have had a number of institutions essentially not pushing back, especially when Trump starts to sort of pick on individual CEOs and insist on a logo of a company gets changed, a CEO gets fired. There seems to be an extraordinary acquiescence amongst corporate America. And unfortunately, for those who've studied the rise of Hitler in Nazi Germany, it was the acquiescence and in some quarters the enthusiastic embrace of Hitler and his ideas that really enabled the rise of that tyranny. Do you see some worrying parallels?
Of course, I live here in Frankfurt, and I have uh, friends and family here that talk. It's eerily about what their grandparents went through and did and said. And of course, the German education system is devoted to making sure that every German kid grows up knowing every single detail of what happened in the 1930s. And so they're horrified. I mean, it's like everything they ever heard that happened leading up to that, they see it happening in America. And the vast majority of Germans, even if their favorite sport is not football, but criticizing American policy, they still have always admired the United States. And they saw the U.S. as the ideal of what could be if you had the opportunity. They never thought the U.S. was perfect, but they saw the ideal. And I have had so many Germans tell me they can't believe what's happened to the checks and balances, or what the hell is going on with the Supreme Court. I mean, they are very knowledgeable about the American Constitution and our system, and they are just dumbfounded that things that they learned were so bad from their parents and grandparents and their education system that they see it happening in the United States today. So I think anybody that's kind of like, "Ah, come on, you're overreacting," is absolutely not paying attention.
That is extraordinary. So I get a lot of that, especially from American friends who are, let's say, sort of Reaganite Republican or perhaps slightly sort of, closer, slightly more radical. And they actually understand the mechanics of Maidan in Ukraine and why it was so important and the necessity of it. And yet, refuse to transpose that idea into their own circumstances or see any of the parallels. It's quite extraordinary.
Well, certainly, I grew up as a Republican, in a Republican family, a conservative, Protestant, North Florida sort of upbringing. I'm independent now because after the January 6th attack on the Capitol, I said, there's no way I can be associated with this party anymore. It's not who it was. But I never, in my wildest dreams, imagined that the Republican Party or the president of the United States would use Kremlin talking points, would take the side of the Kremlin. I mean, we're as far away from, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, or Ich bin ein Berliner. We are so far away from that now, and it's inexplicable. And it's not like there's a gigantic business interest in Russia. We don't need a drop of their oil. Um, and Russia buys nothing from us. We import nothing from Russia except these little wooden stacking dolls. I mean, I don't understand why they feel so beholden or sympathetic to Russia.
Yes, there's very little business, and in fact, the US is clearly not as dependent in any way on the hydrocarbons that Russia produces and the minerals than Europe is. The last question on this topic before we head over to Ukraine as a topic, because there's so much to discuss. It's crazy, of course. Greenland has popped up again, and it seems there's been some kind of attempt at a covert influence operation in Greenland. We've talked about this before, the sort of madness, as it were, of trying to strong arm an ally to take a key territory off them. There has some echoes here. The idea that you might have a small victorious war, this time against an ally, ahead of something like the midterms. This is pretty outlandish, but we've seen a lot of outlandish stuff happening over the last 4 years of the conversations we've been happening and things that we've sort of posited as, well, this is nearly impossible, but let's see, what if this was to happen? Almost all of those outliers have actually happened.
The sad irony of this is that the administration could have gotten everything they wanted from Greenland if they'd have gone about it in a normal way. I mean, Denmark and Greenland have always wanted more investment there. They'd love to have a much bigger U.S. military presence. So it's the idea that somehow we have to go in there and do something is ridiculous. But the way that the world's greatest deal maker, has gone about doing it has had the opposite effect. Now, millions of people around the world know where Greenland is, understand the connection between Greenland and Denmark when they never did before because of these idiots. And I think that it also shows to me, in addition to all the obvious negative things, it's revealed the absolute lack of quality strategic thinking, and also the fact that the lack of competence in what they try to do. Who who thinks you could send three operatives into Greenland and just kind of infiltrate and start? I mean, they know everybody in the village. I mean, it's insane to think that you could just infiltrate three guys in there that could begin to change opinions and that sort of thing. So the lack of competence as well as the lack of strategic vision and understanding how the world is more than just one giant marketplace. Um, and this is going to hurt us so bad in the long run as Denmark and I think now Portugal and other Switzerland and other countries begin to say, we're not interested in your F-35 anymore.
That's it's going to have some pushback for sure. This is a topic we'll need to pursue. I know we have to end it there. Ben, thank you so much for generously appearing on the show once again in this sort of two-part episode that we're going to split it into, and I look forward to the next time.
Thanks very much. Me too, Jonathan.
A final word from our partners, the makers of Kyiv of Mine. All three films are now available to watch for free on YouTube. Please check out the links to the dedicated website, which tells you more about the film, its subject, and the filmmakers. And in the description is also a link to the YouTube channel where you can watch the films right now. Do let us know in the comments what you think of them and if they inspire you as much as they have inspired me.